Hey everybody, and welcome to the 2 o'clock computer, or 2:30. This is Rich Cassara. He's a systems admin and DevOps engineer hailing from the area of Ann Arbor. To us about factors and victims.
Thank you. So I guess I'll get right into it. So the title of this talk is Vectors and Victims, and it's about analyzing information security problems and concerns through the lens of disease models. I like to think about, I like to do a lot of thought experiments and comparative analysis, thinking about things in different ways and how we can compare them. And I think it's a really strong way to get new insights and figure out new ways to do things. So that's here we're saying the objective in this talk is that I want to discuss information security through the lens of epidemiology, which is the fancy word for studying how diseases travel and spread. And like I said before, comparative analysis of things can give a lot of insights and spark ideas in people that may not get them from a more dry, technical, straightforward talk. So if we take things that we know about and think about how they compare to different areas in interesting ways, we can get some new ideas and come up with some new, fresh things to do. So first, I want to make sure everybody's on the same page. We're going to do a quick biology crash course because we're going to be comparing and contrasting biology and information security. Being an information security conference, I assume most people are set with a lot of the basics there, but we may or may not have the same foundings in biology. The primary thing we need to understand for this is the immune system, which is the blue team for your body. It's going to defend you from diseases and other bad things trying to get in and possibly harm your body system. There are actually two different kinds of immune systems in living things. There's the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system. The innate immune system is in every living thing on the planet. It's non-specific defenses against disease and injury. Examples are like your skin. Your skin is a highly important immune organ in your body, but it doesn't matter what is trying to attack you. Your skin is just protecting the inside of your body from things that are outside of it. The adaptive immune system is not in every living thing, but only in vertebrates, specifically jawed fishes and above, because there are a handful of vertebrates that do not have adaptive immune systems. But the adaptive immune system is the process, it's the antibodies and other things within your body that respond to a specific threat and then learn about that threat and make you more able to fight it if you encounter it again in the future. And this is the process by which vaccination works, using the adaptive immune system. So like a good security operation, your body practices defense in depth. First, as I just said, we have the skin on the outside protecting us from all kinds of things that are out in the environment that if you did not have skin would get to you pretty quickly and you wouldn't be very happy. There's the inflammatory response, which is also part of this innate immune system. And this is the body, the cells and tissues swell and generate heat in order to stop things from getting worse, and it can kill certain bacteria or viruses that are trying to get in. Then you have the white blood cells floating around in your circulatory system, which find anything that's a foreign body that doesn't seem to belong there, and they just surround it and eat it. And then, as I said, in the adaptive immune system, we have antibodies, which are specifically tailored proteins that attack anything. They attack viruses that have already been encountered before. And so now we need to, in order to do a proper comparison between our disease models and information security, we need to be on the same, get a frame of reference for how we're going to model this. So we're going to say that a person, a body, is like a computer network or any organization. We have a whole bunch of different individual systems that are working together toward a common goal. In our case, it's living and succeeding as living things, trying to procreate often. And in an organization, it's trying to make money. We're also trying to do that as people. Then the skin, as I said, one of the most important organs for the immune system, acts much like a firewall does for an organization. It's the first line of defense against everything that's outside of that organization. Then we go into this, within your body, you have nervous, circulatory, and lymphatic systems, which send communication signals from one area to another. This acts much like our networks. And then finally, the things that are outside trying to get into us are the pathogens, which are the threat actors that are trying to get into our organization. So there's a couple different ways that diseases come about, different disease origins. The most simple is direct transmission. Then we have vector-borne diseases. These are all ones I'm going to go into depth into each of these categories. There's more categories, but I did not go through all of them. Cancer is its own separate thing that can happen. And then we have the autoimmune diseases. And I'll touch on each of these to a different extent. First, we're going to go on to direct transmission. I'm going to spend the most time here. I've broken it down into a couple different things that we can think about how direct transmission of diseases works, like direct transmission in information security. So in a disease, it's passing from one organism to another. Most commonly, it's within the same species. So it would be you are going from one person to another, but it can go cross-species as well. So for example, your child comes home from school with a nasty cold and passes it on to you by direct transmission. Now, as I said before, the skin is like our firewall. And like any firewall, there have to be some port. You can't have all your ports closed or you're not going to get anything done and your business will die. Similarly, if your body doesn't have some ports open, you're not going to do so well. So in this case, we've got TCP port 25, which is SMTP, and we need to have transmissions happen there because otherwise you have no email. Now, in this example, we're having an email come in, and it's getting delivered to an individual user. This user is going to be a cell. The cell's name is Dave. So the email comes in, and unfortunately, this email has a virus in it, or more properly, an email worm. And the way that an email worm works is that once it gets onto one person's computer, it's going to copy itself. And this is exactly what happens when you get a cold. Oh, sorry, I went too quickly there. So the email copies itself and keeps making copies, and then it sends them all out as far as the eye can see, just like an email worm. Now, in a cell, it fills up the cell with viruses until it explodes and sends the viruses out as far as the eye can see. And it spreads to other cells within your body and then to other people through coughing and sneezing, much like an email worm sends itself out through your address book and gets to all of your contacts. So like I said, this most resembles email worms, which are not to be confused with human worms, which are more like an APT, which I'm going to get into next. So email worms used to be a big deal like 10 to 20 years ago. They were very common, very harmful. Doesn't seem like they're around so much anymore, but wait, last week we just saw this. So it is still a threat. This was the Google Docs, fake Google Docs OAuth hack that was spreading around for a while. But luckily, we've gotten better at handling these things, and Google was able to shut it down within the same day, whereas 20 years ago, an email worm would last for weeks. And so in this framework of thinking about it, Our adaptive immune system, the antibodies that make a specific response to a virus that comes in, are much like an antivirus on your machines. The signature for the primitive way that the initial way antivirus would work is that we would get different virus definitions, which would be a signature like a hash for a specific piece of malware or a virus, and that is just like how our antibodies work. Nowadays, there are problems with that in that, so that was how they initially worked, and then the virus and malware authors learned to make polymorphic code that would change and adapt and create new signatures, so a simple signature definition wouldn't work anymore. And that's the same thing we see in biology with the antibiotic-resistant bacteria starting to show up and becoming more prevalent, because we used to have a signature, like a specific drug that would kill a bacteria, and then that bacteria adapted, so that drug no longer affected it. Also, it's similar in viruses. This is kind of more like the flu or the cold, where they're very mutable viruses. Their genetic code isn't stable, unlike something like polio or the measles, where you have those are stable viruses that we could create a vaccine for, and once you're vaccinated against it, then you can never get that disease because your body already has the antibodies that block it. But the flu and common cold viruses are highly mutable and change all the time. So with the flu, we can see, the scientists can figure out which kinds of flu are most likely to be prevalent, and they can make a shot for it, but it only lasts 1 year because the next year the flu is entirely different and you need a new set of signatures to make a vaccine against that virus. So like I said before, we're going to get back into APT. APT stands for Advanced Persistent Threat, and that is as opposed to like an email worm where somebody just sends it out and it goes wherever it wants to and they just spread havoc. An APT is somebody wants to specifically get at you. Usually this is referred to in terms of like nation states, like China is hacking you, Russia is hacking you, North Korea is hacking you. Just spin the wheel and pick a country that's hacking you. So it's advanced and it's persistent because if you get rid of them, they keep trying to come back, and it's a threat, obviously. So this, like I said, is more like a worm. This lovely piece of nightmare fuel is a tapeworm up close. So we'll get rid of him. Now, so an APT is a lot like a parasite. Instead of talking about viruses, we're going to talk about parasites now. They are deeply embedded. They make themselves, when they're successful, they're very hard to detect, and they siphon off your resources without you knowing about it as much as possible. That's the most successful parasites are just like an APT when they're most successful. They want to stay hidden and not be detected by you as long as possible. So how do you get this? Usually, a lot of times this comes through bad decisions. In this case, this is obviously an example of how to get a parasite. And getting an APT is more like an employee finds a USB in the parking lot that is labeled somehow that makes it tempting for them to plug it into their work computer, and then all of a sudden your company has APT installed somewhere in there. And not until later do you realize that you've made a huge mistake. And now, deeply embedded within your organization, there is a parasite or an APT that is slowly sucking away your resources without you knowing about it. And so the question is, how do we solve this kind of problem? How do we prevent it from happening? This one, and I'm going to go back, this is going to be key in a lot of cases. Monitoring is vital to your security. If you are monitoring if you're monitoring things really carefully, you have a really robust monitoring solution, you can detect anomalies that can lead you to these while they're still in their early stages and haven't had a chance to make a lot of damage. Similarly, if you are really carefully monitoring your health and your things that are happening in your body, you can detect smaller changes that might prompt you to visit a doctor or think that there might be something wrong, and you can catch something like a parasite, like a tapeworm, before it's been going on for too long. The other key thing is education. If you educate your users about the threats of plugging in unsafe USB drives, educate them about opening unsafe phishing emails, you can prevent a lot of these from taking hold, just like if you educate people about properly cooking their food, you can prevent a lot of parasites from taking hold. So the next the next section within direct transmission I want to talk about is domain fronting. Domain fronting I'm going to compare to poisoning. You'll have to bear with me, it takes a little while to get here. So domain fronting is something that's a newer threat. It utilizes, there's a feature within TLS communications, or over SSL, called server name indication, or SNI. And it allows a client to specify a server that it wants to communicate with. And this is outside of your initial TLS packet. So the way that this works, the reason for this is that we have these large content distribution networks now that host multiple things behind a single access point. Things like Amazon CloudFront. And so this what happened is that they were able to use this. Initially, people found that they could circumvent censorship with this, where if you were behind a repressive firewall that wasn't allowing you to see certain things, you could have your client specify a connection behind this endpoint, and the firewall's only looking at the outside of this packet that is saying, oh, I'm going to this Amazon CloudFront point. Well, that's allowed through because there's many legitimate resources behind there, but then the SNI part of the packet was not being introspected by the firewall, and that allowed a client to communicate directly with a server that the firewall may not have wanted them to be able to communicate with. The thing is, this, like any technology, was able to be weaponized, and so there were some APTs where they were able to install a backdoor into a system that was communicating over this domain fronting. So they get a backdoor in, and then it looks like, if you're looking at your outbound traffic, it looks like it's going to Amazon CloudFront, and that's normal. But then within Amazon CloudFront, they set up a small reflector instance, which would then go to their command and control server, which normally would have been detected and blocked by a firewall that was properly monitored. So this is it's a really difficult to detect kind of thing. And this reminded me of, this is going back a long time. In 1982, there was Tylenol tampering in the Chicago area that killed 5 people. And so this is all about trust, where someone goes to a store that they trust, they buy a product that they trust, and this is how Tylenol was packaged at the time. You would open the top, there's just some cotton in there, and then you had these capsules that could be taken apart, and you could replace that powder inside with poison instead. This is actually a case that was never solved. Nobody knows definitively what happened, who did this and why, and it was pretty awful at the time. But it did prompt a recall, and it prompted some safety changes, which we'll get into in a bit. So we're going back to our firewall and our trust, and in this case, we're now going through TCP/80. And so, like a firewall, we've got in our bodies, we do a lot of, we've got rules for what we allow in and what we allow out. These rules are controlled by your brain, which has a whitelist of things that you should put in your mouth and things you shouldn't. So, for example, if your grandma comes with some cookies, then you know this is good. Grandma is a trusted source for food. We're gonna allow this. Her cookies are delicious. Alternatively, that sketchy looking food truck on the corner, your brain might say, let's not go there. So the problem with domain fronting is that this Amazon, like Amazon or any other cloud distribution point, it's a trusted source. You have to trust it because there's so many resources behind it that you do need. So it looks like grandma serving you cookies. But it could be that unbeknownst to grandma and you, somebody went into her flour and replaced it with anthrax. Wait, that's the anthrax I want. So it's this trust problem is the key with domain fronting. And so the solutions here, in the case of the Tylenol tampering, it led to better product safety controls. Now we have all drugs that are sold have these safety seals on it, so you know that this came directly from the factory. Nobody has tampered with it. And there haven't been problems like that since. If anybody does encounter, like anytime anything's happened, it's because like somebody within your house poisoned your own bottle. It's not happening at the store and being returned to the store shelf because these safety seals let you know that it's not safe. In order to map that over to information security, that would involve like a lot better introspection and monitoring from the cloud distribution points. It means that grandma needs to be testing her flour before she makes her cookies. And there's only so much that we can expect them to do. It is really a difficult problem to fully solve, but they are working on it. And when something is detected, it can be shut down immediately, but the detection in the first place is difficult. But then, like I said, the deeper monitoring, again, monitoring on Amazon or whatever cloud provider's part is part of it, but then also on monitoring on the client side. The only way to detect this would be because the packets coming from the client, the firewall is not able to dig in that deep usually. They might be working on improving the firewalls to do that. I don't know if that technology is there yet. But it would slow down the network for sure to introspect that much more than you're already doing. But if we had more monitoring at the client side, so you put a firewall at the individual clients, you could catch this. But again, that's an expensive and a very technically intensive task to put in. So it's a pretty difficult problem to solve. So we're going to move on from the direct transmission to talking about vector-borne diseases. In a vector-borne disease, there's a vector is anything that transmits the disease to another organism, but the vector itself is unaffected. It's just the vessel that the disease goes through. Most commonly, mosquitoes, but other insects. There's other things that can be the vectors for disease. So we're going to look at mosquitoes here. So here we have a virus like dengue or Zika, and the mosquito comes along and it gets this virus inside its gut, and it doesn't bother the mosquito at all. But then the mosquito comes along and finds a person, and now that person is ill. So we're going to wind this back to information security and think about how does this map over here? Well, instead of a virus, let's say that this is a Russian hacker. And instead of a mosquito, this is a bank's website. And this hacker wants to get your banking information, your login, or some other information from you. So it's going to be, the bank website is going to be the vector that it uses to get to you through a cross-site scripting vulnerability. So thinking about cross-site scripting, it really is like a vector in that the bank itself, the bank's website is where this vulnerability is. Just like you're not getting malaria or Zika virus by going out and eating something that has it in it. You're getting infected by this mosquito. You're getting infected by visiting your bank's website, albeit through a maliciously crafted link to it. So it's going to hurt. It's using that website as a vector to get to the user. The website itself doesn't really suffer. And I put an asterisk there because in theory, if companies have a lot of vulnerabilities, if their customers are subject to getting hacked frequently, they should suffer in their reputation, they should suffer in the market in some way. But if you think about it, that never really seems to play out. We can think of, major breaches to Yahoo, Target, Home Depot, TJ Maxx. None of the company, Sony, none of these companies suffer real repercussions for losing their user data. The only one I can think of is that Yahoo probably lost some of its valuation when they were bought out, but ultimately they're still around. It doesn't directly hurt them. Conversely, if there's if you go up to a company's website and you say if you tell a company they have a vulnerability that can directly impact them, this can lead to a shell inside your system, they can steal your data, the company's going to be on the ball trying to fix that as soon as possible. That's like hair on fire. Whereas if they have, you have a reflected XSS and somebody, explains how that can affect their customers, it's a much lower priority because it's not really directly impacting them. They do need to get it fixed. Sometimes they have compliance regulations that they need to get it cleared up for. But if there's not any pressure for them to fix it, it's not pressuring them in of itself because it doesn't actually impact their own bottom line. So the solutions for a vector-borne illness, there's the interesting and technically difficult, and there's the easy way. Something they're doing with mosquito control is that they're looking at the genetically modifying mosquitoes so that they self-destruct, and where they'll genetically modify male mosquitoes, release them into an environment, and then I can't remember the exact details, but I think they're completely infertile or they produce offspring that are completely infertile, and it causes the entire mosquito population to collapse in the area. It's really interesting science, but it's technically difficult and expensive. The alternative is to provide mosquito nets, which is proved really effective in poorer parts of Africa at reducing malaria infections. And so mosquito nets is something that I was thinking about with this, that we're kind of doing with our browsers. The browsers are working on preventing the simpler XSS effects. So we get back here, and so we're going to put a mosquito net on our user. And so now when this hacker tries to get in, instead he's blocked by Chrome has a built-in XSS auditor, which can catch a lot of the effects. Now there are still ways to circumvent this, just like you can get a hole in a mosquito net, but it does reduce the ability for it to get through. And as the browsers update and get better at this, they'll make it harder and harder for these kinds of attacks to affect people. So I'm going to move on now from the vector-based illness to cancer. Cancer obviously is an awful illness that can affect anybody at any time. And similarly, this is something that, so it happens from biologically. We have a mutation that starts within the cells of the body, and that mutation causes them to uncontrollably replicate themselves, form tumors, and they choke off the rest of the resources in the body. There are, some cancers are going to just happen, and there's nothing you can do. There are some that are exacerbated by external factors, obvious examples like lung cancer for smokers. But earlier detection, the sooner that you know that there is a cancerous mass, and the better the outlook is at getting it cleared out and having a normal rest of your life. So thinking about this in information security is like an insider threat in your company. You start with a disgruntled employee who might be just plugging away at work but not particularly happy. Let's introduce an external factor like some shady foreign agents that get in contact with this person. And they convince them, either monetarily or through some other means, that they should send them some information on your company. And they'll send them a little bit at first, and then more and more and more. And the longer it goes on, the worse it is for your company. Similar to the longer that the cancer is undetected and allowed to grow, the worse the outlook is for the person. So just like cancer, there is no easy cure for an insider threat. We can screen personnel, we can monitor them, but there's always a risk that people are always the weakest link in an organization, and somebody could fall. And as I said before, monitoring. The more you can monitor the things coming in and going out of your networks, the better your chances are of detecting it early on and cutting it off before it's too late. So finally, I wanted to talk about autoimmune disease. Autoimmune disease can range from things like allergies to the immune system of the body attacking certain cells in your own body. So there are the autoimmune disorders it's an oversensitivity in the immune system, such that it's attacking things that it shouldn't be. And that attack, depending on how strong the response on it, can be life-threatening, as the case is with many allergies. And this is something we see in information security. This is something that is constantly happening. Somebody updates your antivirus or some other security system, and it detects a vital system files as being bad, and it quarantines them and bricks your system. So that is much like an autoimmune disorder. Also, you can have this autoimmune problem in your information security status from your own staff. So let's say there is a vital part of your business, and you've got networking rules that allow people to get to different resources, and an administrator makes a mistake and blocks off access somewhere that needs access. Your company is not going to be doing well until you get that fixed. So I'm going to start wrapping up the talk. So like as I've been talking about and doing this analysis, an organization and a human body there's a lot that is the same about them that we need to, they're both trying to, keeping them healthy requires a lot of work, a lot of monitoring. You can choose to ignore these things, and you might be fine, but you might not. And the more that you can monitor, the more work and resources you can put into keeping your organization or your body healthy, the better your outcomes are going to be. Also, the other thing I wanted to say is with doing this kind of analysis is that being able to make these metaphors and talk about things in different ways is a really good way to communicate security information to different audiences. So if you're, say, on the red team and you've just done a pen test on a company, if you just hand them a list of vulnerabilities and walk away, they're not going to get a lot out of that. If you can communicate if you can communicate to them the way that the problems really affect them, they'll be more likely to fix them and keep them fixed. And being able to communicate that often takes reframing it through a different lens, like talking about diseases, because not everybody understands computers or information security, but most people understand what it's like to get sick. So you can kind of map it over onto that, and it's a little easier for them to understand. If you're on a blue team and you're trying to sell the company on why you need XYZ and it costs, $100,000, they might not want to give you that budget, but if you can really effectively communicate to those that are in charge of the budget why it's really important for your company to have this to keep your company healthy, they might be more on board. And so that's where I'm going to end it. If there's any questions or comments. Yes.
How did you come up with all of these different? How did you come up? Is it working? Hey, how did you come up with all these different examples? And have you given something like this before? I was just like, wow, yeah, that would. It's like a virus. I get it.
Yeah. Well, this is the first time I'm giving this talk, so I haven't done this before. But I don't know. It's just something that I always like to reframe things and think about them in different ways that I can communicate it to a wide audience. And yeah, I've been working on this talk for the past few months, trying to get it into shape, and so I've come up with the different examples along the way. And if there's nothing else, then thank you very much.